Today's episode of Socially Democratic is now available on Patreon. Join Socially Democratic on Patreon for free or for as little as $2.50 a month, and you can help support the show. And when you sign up as a campaign organiser, you get access to our premium episodes and a free ticket to a live show, and plus you get the Haters Hate and the Rest Vote Labor merch. And we'd like to thank our latest member, Dylan, for joining our Patreon community. And if you have signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking you for your shipping address so we can send you out the Socially Democratic merch. And to join these comrades, click on the Patreon link in the show's notes. Today's episode is also presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. We develop community engagement strategies to win campaigns both big and small. And we train engagement staff and volunteers in the Marshall Gantz framework of leadership, organising and action. And if you want to create action in your community, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. They believe the law should serve everyone, not just those who can afford it. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years, and they've helped more than 500,000 people get the compensation they deserve. So if you've been injured at work or on the road, you may have a claim through your super. And to get expert and empathetic legal support, then call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that is out every Friday and that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the folks leading them from home and abroad. Today's episode is obviously recapping week 3 of the Queensland state election. And don't forget, on Friday, we're dropping our second episode of the US presidential election weekly recap with Katie Parsons and Ross Morales-Ricchetto. And don't forget to subscribe to the show via whatever podcast app you're using. And for everything else, follow Socially Democratic on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. All right, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Tuesday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people on a glorious spring day here in Melbourne. And I'm sure the weather's just as glorious up in sunny Queensland. It's 4 days to go at the time of recording for the Queensland election. Voters are voting. And to unpack the week that was and really get us ready for E-Day, and it's our third instalment of our Queensland election preview. I'm joined by Jackie Trad, former Queensland Deputy Premier and Treasurer in successful Labor governments and a former Queensland Assistant Secretary. Jackie, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Stephen, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Yagara and the Turrbal people.
Wonderful. Beautiful. And he was a former Waterford Labor MP. Let's get that up front and centre. And a former State Secretary of the Queensland branch and now head of an actor, Evan Moorhead. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Welcome, Stephen. I'm joining you from from London.
Are you really? You kept that quiet in the preview. What?
I thought the date call behind you was too nice.
It is too nice.
I was wondering the same thing. I was going, Evan, didn't take you for a sort of a period piece kind of interior design?
No.
I'm in a London apartment, which makes me feel like I've moved in with my grandma.
Lovely. All right. Well, you tell you what, fair effort, because for those of you that are watching on YouTube, at the start of every episode, we ask each other to bring some swag and a bit of a story behind it. So props to you, Evan, for hauling that dog ugly T-shirt right across the other side of the world. Tell us, what the hell are you wearing?
It's pretty worn out. This is a better way for Queensland, which was the 2015 slogan that was the Labor Party's, return to power after the Newman government. And I had to bring it out this week because I noticed that David Crisafulli has been stealing a better way for Queensland, threw it into his leaders' debate speech like 4 times.
Everything's postmodern.
Yeah, trying to reinvent things when he was actually the Campbell Newman of this story, not the Anastasia Palaszczuk of the story, I suspect.
Yeah, and bringing good juju as well with that. Jackie, what are you wearing today?
Well, before I get to that, I have to say that the other reason why Evan's wearing that T-shirt, I suspect, is he was the campaign director for that sensational campaign, and even though it was a winning campaign, like an historic campaign, the T-shirt is so ugly and lacks any sort of pizzazz. It's a wonder that our booth workers even put it on, but they did, and we won. So congratulations, Evan.
It's a reflection of how broke the Labor Party was
Yeah, correct.
at that time.
Correct. Now I am wearing my Labor for Treaty T-shirt.
Okay.
So I am wearing that, and I, in a similar vein to wearing the Labor for Choice T-shirt last week, and that is because treaty is also one of the things that is under threat. Well, it's not a threat. Chris Affulia said he will stop the treaty process in Queensland. And interestingly, in the debate last week, he said he would do it with respect. Now, if there was an illustration of doublespeak, that would be it. We are going to stop a process that recognises First Nations people, deliver a treaty in Queensland, as is underway in other parts of the country, including where you're from, Stephen, but we're going to do it respectfully.
That sounds like someone, firing you, but in a nice way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we're letting you go, but respectfully, you're letting go. There's not a lot of respect going here because you're giving me the ass out of my job, and I'm not that pleased about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a reasonable analogy, but it's so much more at stake for First Nations Queenslanders. So yeah,
Absolutely,
it's pretty awful.
it is. So let's get into today's episode, but before we do, I actually want to just quickly acknowledge a great result for Labor over the weekend. We had the ACT elections, and Labor has been returned again. Now going to enter into their 8th term. Who says long-term governments can't get re-elected? So a fantastic result. It's still, I think the last seat is still in the balance, but a really, really good result for Labor and the team there. Just want to get Jackie, go to you first. Your reflections on a really good night for the Labor Party in Canberra.
Yeah, it was just fantastic, and I want to congratulate Andrew. I've worked with Andrew. He, of course, is the ACT's treasurer as well as chief minister, and just a terrific guy. So big congratulations to Andrew and his team. I think it's a victory that they absolutely deserved. One of the interesting takeaways from me is the fact that the Greens political party went backwards, and I think it speaks to the fact that when you've got a similar party like Pocock's Independence engaging in the same tactics that the Greens do on the progressive end of the political spectrum, which is stand outside and say nothing is good enough and throw rocks, it does do you brand damage and electoral damage. And so the Greens have been doing this to Labor forever, so sacrificing progress for protest. And I think it's interesting to see the impact on their own party in a territory where they have been sharing in the decision-making process for quite a long period of time.
Evan,
Did you
you're
see
smiling.
Yeah, I saw the incredible comments by Shane Rattenbury after the election, essentially saying, "Oh, you don't understand how hard it is to be responsible for stuff." It was incredible, literally blaming their electoral result on having to be responsible for policy, which was an incredible lack of insight. No, like the ACT Labor run a really good government, but I got to say also, like Ash Van Dyke and the team ran a really good campaign. Like the Libs, the ACT Libs did get off to a bit of a start and did sort of do a good job to harness that sort of long-term government angst. But I think by the end, they were managing to show how like odd that ACT Liberal movement is. Like the ACT Liberals, have some pretty weird dudes hanging around running for the Legislative Assembly, and I think they did a good job of showing that. I don't think you can fault Ash on anything in that campaign.
Very good. So, yes, well done to the team in the ACT. Great results. And let's take that winning vibe into Queensland this week. So, for those of you that have not been following the state of the play or the state of the race in the Sunshine Coast, the Sunshine State, is 93 seats in the Legislative Assembly. 47 seats is the magic number. Labor currently holds 51. The LNP have got 35. They need 12 to win to form government. We've got a bunch of new polls out in the last couple of days. In fact, one's dropped today. Evan, do you want to give us a bit of an overview of the polls that we've seen in Queensland?
Yeah, like I think last week we commented that it had been sort of halfway during the election we hadn't seen sort of the serious polling come out, and we've seen in the last couple of days two, which we've seen YouGov come out with a 55-45 result, which is up from some of the worst, some of the more concerning results earlier. Like I think the most important bit of that, like you got to take, you still got to take polling with a grain of salt when people are still deciding. But the primary, like the best bit is like Labor now has a primary vote starting with a 3, which puts it in, back in range to, win a whole range of seats that it wasn't when it's had a primary vote starting with a 2. And then I think you've also seen some of the campaign be really successful at showing the scrutiny on Christopher Foley has really harmed his ratings, and you can see that coming out in his preferred premier stakes. The other really interesting one is the Resolve poll that's in Brisbane Times, which has an even closer result and was taken a bit later, sort of 53-47 result. Obviously, these are sort of polls for commentators, but what participants should take away from polling is like the really positive trend is that it's all heading in the right direction. In campaigns, you use polls to work out what moves votes, not where votes used to be last week. And I think it's all heading in, that's all heading in the right direction. I think it's all, it's still pretty hard ask on our people from here, but, it looks to me like the sort of campaign has actually moved the needle.
I guess we talked about this last week as well, this manifestation that a political campaign ends at 6 p.m. when the polls have closed. And regardless of what research that we have available to us, there is a strategy that we have to implement, and we have to execute that as best as we possibly can and hold your nerve. And I think sometimes we see folks who blink when they get information back and think, oh, shit, we're done. And I've seen that in campaigns. I've seen people just change strategy to, trying to save, I hate this term, saving the furniture, like really back end, sort of go deep into your own resources and sort of protect seats and whatnot. If your strategy is to win government, then you execute a strategy to win government. And I do think, and we'll talk more about what we're seeing from it, but clearly there is this movement that is happening because of the way the campaign has been run by Labor and the pressure that they are putting on the LNP. I think that's super positive. Jackie, I just want to get your reflections on these polls that have come out.
I totally agree. The election finishes at 6 p.m. this Saturday. It doesn't finish the last time, an exit poll or a poll comes out. We saw in 2009, actually, the election that Anna Bligh was not supposed to win, but she won on a strategy of jobs, not cuts. It's a recurring theme in Queensland because the LNP have this tactic all the time. But that campaign was won in the last 3 days of the election campaign. So every single day matters, and it matters right up until 6 p.m. on polling day. In terms of the polls, I think it's really clear that the more people see of Stephen under pressure, the more they like him. The more they see of Christopher Foley under pressure, the less they like him. And that tightening of the preferred premier poll is really illustrative of that. I also think that there's a big concern in the Resolve poll. We have almost 30% of Queenslanders wanting to park their vote with a third party. Now, in Queensland, we have got compulsory preferential voting. But Chrysopher and the LNP want to introduce optional preferential voting, go back to optional preferential voting. And what that means is for the 30% of voters in the future, if he does get law changes across the line in the Queensland Parliament, if he is elected, what that means is Queenslanders will be burning a lot of votes and not going to a preferred major party that can actually govern the state. And I think that will lead to further cynicism and disenfranchisement from the actual process of government and decision making.
Yeah, the other thing I want to sort of reflect on, and I think we were talking about it before the show began, is don't make the mistake of starting to measure up the curtains in the Oval Office, so to speak, before the results being declared. And there's a little bit of hubris coming out of the LNP campaign at this moment that gives me throwbacks to Hillary Clinton 2016 kind of vibes. Devin, just want to get your take on that.
It's been worse than that, Stephen. It's been like pretty outrageous behaviour. Like we've heard reports of, internal joking in the LNP that they've been describing Christopher for the last, 12 months as Premier-elect. He made a speech in 2021 where he described he was going to win and going to win big. Like they have been behaving like they're a government in exile for 12 months. And you can see that in the campaign that, because they felt that they were going to win, they thought they didn't have to answer the tough questions. And what they've succeeded in doing is making the election entirely about what they stand for and what their mandate is. Like you'd think they would have learned the lesson from history, but they haven't. They've, I think they have been measuring up the curtain, Stephen, and I think they've been sort of caught out. Like Queensland voters are, putting them under the microscope as the campaign moves from, what the grievances are to who's going to be Premier on Monday after the election.
There was even a bit of chit-chat, I don't know if you noticed, in the Australian, I think it was last Friday, about who was sizing up to take over the Director General role of Premier and Cabinet. So, obviously they're talking to the media about floating potential candidates for Director General roles within the Queensland government. And so that just all paints to, as Evan said, an opposition that sees itself as a government in waiting, and that this is just a tick and flick exercise from their perspective.
Like, even like there's like an arrogance to that, but there's also just like bad political strategy, right? Like they should have, like, the effort of moderating expectations and making it a clear choice. They've sort of failed that. Just I suspect mostly out of ill discipline rather than some sort of better view. Like literally going around behaving like you're going to win. It just like makes people look at you harder, provide more scrutiny, and it makes people angry too, right? Queenslanders are pretty good at knocking down tall poppies, and running around pretending like you're the Premier-elect puts you in the spotlight.
Yeah.
And even just my own campaign superstition, I never, ever talk about anything beyond 6 p.m. on election day, like I just don't. When people, even if I'm in a strategy meeting and someone says something about after election day, no, don't even mention that. All right.
Yeah.
Our eyes are on the prize. Let's focus on what we can do right now and what we can control. Now, I know that obviously in the machinations of governing that you need to you start playing things like transition teams and that kind of stuff. And that's never been my role. But certainly as a campaigner, I just do not talk about anything beyond election day. I just don't. I just do not knock the campaign gods when it comes to this sort of stuff. And I'm not a superstitious person, but on this stuff, I certainly am. I just do not talk about it, and them starting to get a little bit cocky. I was like, oh man, you are just calling on some bad karma here if you're starting to play like that. And also voters, to your point, Evan, they're not stupid, and they see this sort of stuff. They go, hold on a minute, mate. Don't get too far ahead of yourself. This thing isn't done yet. So speaking of getting ahead of themselves, let's just do a bit of a recap of some of the stuff that's happened this week, starting with what I'd call cracks in the wall. We've talked about this in the last 2 episodes, the pressure that is being applied upon the LNP and their candidates. Can they hold tight on this position when it comes to their views on what they will do if they were to win government. And with respect to abortion, we saw that the LNP candidate for Stretton, Freya Ostapovich, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, was quoted saying on a pre-poll booth, you vote for me, you trust me. I can't say anything yet, but because we have to get elected before we do anything, but I'm on the record, I am pro-life. Jackie, to you first of all, you've been talking about this the last 2 weeks, that there's clearly an underbelly within this party that they are just trying to keep a lid on, and now we're starting to see it start to fall apart.
Firstly, you did pronounce her name correctly, Freya Ostapovich, and I had the joy of sitting next to her in the Queensland Parliament when we were an opposition of 7. And Freya is an interesting person, made sensational claims like abortion gave women breast cancer, was the cause of breast cancer in women. So clearly someone who doesn't base her opinions or her beliefs in science or fact. And so, but Freya is well connected in the LNP. Obviously, she's a candidate in one of their key seats, and I have no doubt that she is actually speaking on behalf of many inside the LNP who want to see abortion recriminalised in Queensland. Interestingly, just now, Stephen, Robbie Katter has come out and said that he intends to only introduce a bill that seeks to care for babies born who have no prospect of life after birth, rather than recriminalise abortion. So he actually introduced a bill into Parliament, I understand, earlier this term, and it got knocked over. So he's talking about reintroducing that bill that has I guess, a palliative or a care of life for baby post-birth that is not able to live independently. So this is a big backflip for your listeners. This is a big backflip, and I understood that there was a vox pop on the ABC in Katter country in Mount Isa, where they were asking all of these young people under the age of 30 who they were voting for and if Robbie Katter's position on abortion would change their vote. And 9 out of 10, 90% of those young people said, yes, it would make me reconsider voting for him. So I do wonder whether or not it's also hurting him close to home, because every single woman in regional Queensland knows how underfunded, underavailable services have been that help meet their reproductive needs.
Evan, I'm interested to get a sense of you about how did the LNP leadership try and clean this up, and were they successful in that?
I think they've tried really hard to just shut down and they've done the classic not let candidates talk and get the party to issue statements on behalf of everyone. Like, I think, Jackie, it's unlike you, but you've been incredibly overly polite to Freya. Freya is a weirdo, right? Like, I ran against Freya in 2009 state election. She comes out of it, and abortion is her driving. Like, in 2009, that was her driving force for getting involved in the LNP. Like, the point for Queenslanders, even if Robbie Katter changes his position, the point for Queenslanders is the LNP is full of weirdos like that who they are hiding until they get elected. And who knows some of the mad stuff? Like, if they think abortion causes breast cancer, imagine what other mad stuff they're going on with in there. Like, there's not someone saying, hey, in their show saying to, hey, Freya, like, we're going to do policy on science, mate. Stop that nonsense. Like, because she's been saying that for a long time. Like, she doubled down last week. Like, people might remember Freya from the 2015 campaign, like publicly losing her shit on TV by throwing witches' cones at the ETU protesters at her campaign launch. Like, these are, like, Stephen, like, you can't underestimate, like, when the LNP and the National Party merged to form, when the Liberal Party and the National Party merged to form the LNP, we also saw a big influx of these quite right-wing conservative evangelical activists, and Freya is one of those. And there's lots of evangelical people with great progressive politics, but Freya is not one of them. Like this is sort of, if you scratch beneath the LNP surface, this is what you find.
Well, there's her position. There's the Rockhampton candidate who said abortion is the worst human rights abuse ever. You've got Amanda Stoker, who is well known nationally as a rabid anti-choicer. And all of these people are very well connected to their local evangelical or, very conservative Christian communities that want to see the laws recriminalised. And they will be putting pressure on them to actually mount internal campaigns to actually change the laws. So Freya is only basically coming out with what she and other people within her party and her community want to see happen. And here's where leadership comes into play. Here's where David Crisafulli and what he thinks, what he believes, and how he's going to lead matters. Because if he's saying he has no plan, but everybody else in his team, or 90% of his team, have a plan to actually recriminalise abortion, what is he going to do? That is the question here. And he has been arrogant and dismissive and will not actually come clean with the women of Queensland.
And I think the telling thing in the remarks that she made to that voter, Freya Ostapovic's remarks, where she said, I can't say anything. They have clearly been directed by LNP CHQ and the leadership that we are not going to say a word on this. We understand that this is an issue that's very, very important to you and for you, and to your point, Jackie, before, many of you have got involved in politics because of this issue, and we will do things about it if we get and when we get elected. But up until then, we know that this is a political liability. You cannot say anything. We must be disciplined on this. So this would have been a message, said to them 1,000 times. And it was just all revealed in that I can't say anything because I've been told I can't say anything. And so to your point, it has to be pointed that, the scrutiny and accountability has to be put back to Crisafulli to say, what's going on in your party? You are clearly hiding something. And we are asking you, and you are not coming. You have to be clear so voters can make an informed decision when they walk into the polls and cast their vote. You cannot, deceive electors. Otherwise, this is completely undermining the whole concept of what we call liberal democracy.
At least the weirdos in your part of the world, Stephen, are upfront about being weirdos, right? They do, like, they're honestly weirdos, whereas our people are weirdos who are pretending not to be.
Your weirdos have a streak of pragmatism that I don't like, Evan.
Your weirdos are busy suing each other in court to prove
Exactly.
who's weirder.
But also, I think that perhaps there is a level of discipline right now, and that is because they have been spectacularly and just underperforming and suboptimal. And I think the pressure will continue to come to bear on them. I guess my point is, if they see that government is close, then I think that they will try and keep it under wraps. And that just is much more of a pressure point for Crisafulli. Like, okay, you can be as disciplined as you like, but your job is to come clean with the people of Queensland. What are you going to do if your team, as John Krause says, we have to get like-minded people starting to work this up? What are you going to do when there's revolt in your party room?
Well, let's talk about the LNP from a broader perspective, because on the weekend they had their launch, arguably one of the latest launch times I've ever seen in a political campaign. A bit weird to launch a campaign with 6 days of to election day and a week already of people voting, but nonetheless they did. Evan, do you want to give us a bit of an overview of what you saw from the central thematics of the LNP launch on the weekend?
Oh, look, no one should be surprised. The LNP rolled out with a doubling down on crime. I do think they're getting into some odd places on crime, though, right? They've moved from, adult crime, adult time, like a slogan without detail. And now they're picking into like weird, like mandatory commitments about mandatory isolation, commitments around removing TVs from youth detention centres. Like, it's just getting a bit odd, right? And you can see we're in this extraordinary world now where the LNP are now running ads in regional Queensland accusing like the Katter Party of being soft on crime. Like we're through the looking glass here, Stephen. Like we're sort of into some, like the desperation of the LNP to talk about crime is seen in their campaign launch. They're just sticking to that one issue. I do think their crime stuff, they've overcooked it though. I think they've got to the point where crime, like the stuff they're doing now is starting to look like hyper political and like an election tactic, not like someone who's deeply concerned about crime and trying to fix it. Like they just like I just think they're making it too political. Is sort of I think there'll be lots of people who will see their campaign launch and think, oh well, obviously their position on crime was a political tactic rather than a genuine cause for politics.
Mm. What else did you take from the launch, Jackie?
Well, I thought it was very interesting that they held it in Ipswich. Again, I think that this is not familiar territory for the LNP. This is, this is, they must be feeling a level of confidence around picking up support in that community to have the launch in Ipswich. I want to give a shout out to whoever it was who actually found out where the launch was, because there was, I think, very effective protests that sat alongside of the launch. So you had the Handmaid's Tale women in costumes, and you had electric ETU people out talking about energy jobs. So, there was a very good protest out there at the same time, and it really did good on the Labor campaign for organising this, because what it meant was the theme of crime and tough on crime was actually balanced out with women losing their reproductive freedoms under an LNP government, so I thought thematically that was very good. That was very strong. I agree with Evan in terms of the sort of rabbit hole they're going down in terms of crime. And the other thing I just really, really find difficult to stomach is that there seems to be, in terms of the crime narrative, this fixation on young offenders. And we know that one of the biggest groups of offending in our community are men in intimate relationships and domestic violence. And I just find it politically expedient that they are completely focused on young people and making young people, the central, I guess, baddies in terms of their election campaign. It must just send, for a lot of young people out there, a very, very scary message. Also, the whole policy around isolation, locking kids up in isolation if they don't do what they're told, doesn't sound to me like someone who's been around a lot for raising their children, because isolating kids is a very drastic thing to do, particularly kids who've had significant psychological damage and attachment issues. And as someone who's been in watch houses before, I can tell you that this is a very, very quick recipe for, further psychological damage and hardening their criminal activity. This is not based on good evidence or good science.
And even thematically, looking at it from a distance, like if you are the LNP and you're looking at the polling, and you're feeling good about yourself and your prospects, and you're playing a small target strategy, there's no reason why you can't do a campaign launch that's grounded in some level of hope, because you're kind of talking to your base there anyway, aren't you? You'll get, and you just kind of want to get some pictures for the TVs that night that are positive, and this is our future plans for Queensland, just to sort of drum home that clear, consistent, hopeful message of what the future will look like. But instead, you're trying to paint this dystopian view about the way that the state looks, and coming up with, as you said, this draconian type, policy is your central pitch around crime. Like, even like I think back to say like in 2014 in the Victorian state campaign, yeah, there was things that there was a crisis in Victoria with the ambulances. There was, there was a lot of issues that were going on, and yeah, we made announcements at our campaign launch that were seeking to address that. But broadly speaking, the pitch still was there is hope for Victorians, and if you want to create change, then you should vote for us. Yada yada yada, right? But just the core message coming out of it was just so negative and so angry, and I just don't think voters are going to resonate with that. I mean, what were they doing with that kind of message?
Well, I think there's two bits to it, right? One is to not make people think about what they would be in government and whether they'd do what they did last time with, sort of cuts and privatisation agenda. I think the other bit is the point that Jackie raised earlier, that when you've got like 28% of the electorate voting for third parties, like part of this is like the LNP trying to be tougher on crime than other extreme right-wing parties. Like, like Labor people should be pretty clear that that is like a fight, between the LNP and One Nation and Katter for a bit of chest beating over some regional seats, and isn't actually targeted at mainstream political debates. It is an argument about who can be more extreme on the right. It is like, like
And you're
like
right, Evan, but it does have an impact in terms of the broader political discussion and narrative, and it does, and particularly when the media has been banging on about this in a disproportionate way for a very long time. So you're absolutely right in terms of trying to, garner as much support amongst that 28% of, I guess, alternate party votes. But it does
I think there's like.
impact.
Is it? I
think
mean,
there's like
is it chest beating, Evan, or is it something more? Like, I mean, are they are they worried about their primary in some of those key seats you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think there's two bits to it, right? There is like a general bit on crime, which, there is like a genuine concern in the community about that, right? People who don't want their car stolen. But voters are smarter than that, right? Like they don't want their car stolen. They're worried about it. They want the justice system to work, but they don't necessarily want kids locked up in mandatory detention, right? Like mandatory isolation, right? Like voters are smart enough to know that they don't have to do that, and they know that actually makes the problem worse. So I think there's like a mainstream debate on crime about police numbers and retention and services and intervention. And then there is this launch type material, which is like political grandstanding at the extremes to try and pitch into those places where they will be worried about their primary vote in some of those places where they want to, win Labor seats in regional Queensland. No, there will be a lot of working class people in regional Queensland who still feel the pain from 10 years ago and will want to park their vote with someone else other than the LNP.
And I also think strategically Labor has taken the hope proposition off the agenda for them in terms of all of our cost of living measures. I mean, the most significant issue that voters are talking about is cost of living, and Labor has Stephen and Labor have systematically gone about addressing this. So in terms of the hope narrative that the LNP could have possibly talked about, because it's not action on climate change, it's not a better health system, because Labor has been doing an enormous amount in that respect. So the cost of living measures that Labor has introduced has taken their hope agenda off them, and I think that was quite smart and strategic. So then all they've got is their chest beating and ramping up the crime issue.
Yeah, it's interesting when you put it that way, actually. Well, speaking of hope, let's do some seat analysis. Last week we looked at metropolitan Brisbane. Today we're going to take a look at Cairns, the Gold Coast, because we had to cut the Gold Coast last week, and Logan. Jackie Trad, starting with you, let's talk about Cairns, a place that I got sent to in 2012 when I was a party official to go and support the good burgers up there. So a place certainly is reasonably familiar to me. I spent 2 months living out of a hotel room, working on Cairns, Barron River, and is it Mulgrave?
Mulgrave, yeah.
Mulgrave, yeah. So tell us about Cairns. What's going on up there?
So Cairns is very interesting. We have, I might start with Mulgrave first, because Mulgrave is a seat where the current Speaker of the Parliament has announced his retirement, and so he's not recontesting. That was all very late. but Labor has got in Richie Bates, someone who is a very local, very popular person, identity, a former councillor. Is he still a councillor, Evan? I think he's still a
No,
councillor.
he's not.
No,
He didn't
he,
run at the last election.
he didn't run at the last election, but which was earlier this year. But very popular, very well known. So I think Richie's in for a good show there. In terms of the actual seat of Cairns itself, I think that's going to be, basically a dogfight right up until 6 p.m. on polling day. We have running against Michael Healy, who is a very, very popular local identity as well. Warren Encher's wife, who has got quite a lot of clouds hanging over her head in terms of the business that she runs and federal government grants to her business. So Labor is running hard up there, and I have got a lot of faith in Michael to be able to, get across the line for Labor, get it across the line for Labor. Cook is very difficult, I think. It's a very big electorate. It's got a lot of Indigenous communities in it. We have in our candidate up there a relatively long-serving MP. Cynthia has been the MP up there now. This is her third term that she's running for. Torres Strait Islander woman has been instrumental in delivering some really overdue reforms. I noticed that Stephen announced a new oral health flying doctors service for the Torres Strait, which is fantastic news. Very, very important, and it will mean huge amount in terms of the health of Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal communities in Cook. So Cynthia is a really good campaigner, and I think hopefully, all of those communities voted quite strongly in support of the Voice last year. So it'll be interesting to see how Cook goes.
Let's get on an aeroplane and fly a couple of hours south to the GC. I don't know if anyone calls it that, but I do. The Gold Coast. Evan, just tell us a bit about the uniqueness that is the GC.
Wow. Probably rightly, Stephen, no one on the Gold Coast calls it the GC since that tourism campaign. But probably appropriately that the Gold Coast is full of former Victorians. It's been that way since Kylie and Jason's character moved there to get married.
Well, serious throwbacks here. I'm really impressed. You've done your homework. This is good.
Look,
Evan does like a soap opera.
I think like the Gold Coast is a really different political culture to the rest of Queensland, right? It is, it's been a conservative stronghold for a long time. We were able to, in 2001 through 2012, build a base of MPs. At one stage, we had 7 MPs on the Gold Coast out of, I think, 12. And that was hard work, right? And we sort of did get a foothold, and we lost that foothold in 2012. We and didn't win a seat. Like when we won government in 2015, we didn't win a seat on the Gold Coast. But in 2017, Megan Scanlon was elected in the seat of Gavin. Like it is the sort of the way the Gold Coast structured means you don't end up with big blocks of working class voters together. You end up with these electorates that have wealthy high-rise apartments mixed in with public housing, so you actually don't get a whole lot of Labor seats down there. But Megan's done an incredible job. Megan had run previously for Fadden in 2016. In 2017, door knocked against another LNP weirdo in Sid Cramp. There's lots of these, Stephen, and he sort of because they'd used Sid Cramp to knock off another weird LNP MP, Alex Douglas, who'd gone to the Palmer Party before that. And Megan, I think, has really taken that seat with gusto and become a really high-profile MP and a really high-profile minister in the government. And I got to say, I know you're a direct voter contact zealot, Stephen, and Megan is a true believer. I don't think I've seen anyone who's like, so good on the doorstep and, shamelessly knocking on doors for months and months and months. So like, I think it is like on the pure maths of it, you'd say it'd be hard to hold on. I think on the profile of Megan, that door knocking capacity, and just the fact that traditionally Gold Coasters have been really focused on delivery, like they want you to build them things. And I don't know if you've ever driven from Brisbane to the Gold Coast, but I reckon for the 10 years of, no, for the entire period of the Palaszczuk Miles government, there has been a construction project on that M1 project for the entire time. I think, Jackie, at one stage we were rebuilding it at both ends at the same time.
Yeah.
Like Labor's really delivered for Gold Coast. They're getting, a new Coomera hospital, investment in the M1. Like Gold Coasters want to see what they're getting for their money. And I think, frankly, like, it'd be hard to give them anything more. The infrastructure pipeline's pretty full.
Jackie, Gold Coast, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a real soft spot for the Gold Coast, I have to say, and I think that one of the best things about Megan's presence on the Gold Coast is that she has not only worked her seat incredibly well, but she's also used that dedicated media market to deliver messages around what Labor is doing on the Gold Coast, in the Gold Coast region. Of course, regardless of the political representation coming from the Gold Coast, it is the fastest growing city in Queensland, and we have, as a Labor government, invested heavily, whether that's in light rail or heavy rail duplication. I mean, I'm a former infrastructure minister, so I can rattle off everything that we've done there and bore your audience to death. But I think one of the things that neutralises Labor's presence on the Gold Coast is we've always had a really good working relationship with Tom Tate. So he's a very popular LNP mayor down there. I think he has a bit of significant influence within the LNP more broadly. And so I think people really do see that it's not a contest between Labor and the LNP in terms of infrastructure delivery, because Tom Tate is very happy to, put a flag in the ground and say, we need these infrastructure projects and I'm going to lobby whoever, wherever, in order to get them. So he's been pretty effective in that respect. And I think people on the Gold Coast see that a lot of the infrastructure is shared infrastructure. So I think that the Gold Coast is going to be incredibly tricky for us. I am very hopeful. I only hear amazing things about Megan. I have been door knocking with Megan. I think I launched her first campaign, and she is the future of the Labor Party in Queensland. So I really do hope that she gets there across the line.
It sounds like she's the embodiment of an old sort of Victorian field slogan, which is "Leave it all on the field," and that's all we can do. So
and fundamentally, so Megan has a brother with a disability, a profound disability, and so for Megan, her story has been about understanding that it's only been Labor governments that really do deliver for people who are on the margins and people who are not seen in terms of mainstream public policy, and so Labor has changed the life of her brother and her family, and that's why she is a fantastic warrior for the Labor cause.
Love it. Last area we're going to look at is Logan, and currently held by a good friend of the pod, former guest, Linus Power. Evan, give us a bit of a skinny on Logan.
Yeah, like this, the seat of Logan, it's the same seat that, it's the same name of the seat that former Premier Wayne Goss held in the 90s, but you've seen redistribution after redistribution have turned it from an urban seat into a peri-urban seat, and now represents some of the fastest growing communities in Queensland. There's whole suburbs that are there now which weren't there in 2015 when we first won. It's been a seat where One Nation have traditionally done well. I think in 2017 we're under significant threat from One Nation, and I think Linus has done a really good job to reach out and listen to those people who sort of express their frustrations through One Nation to essentially deliver them like Mount Lindsay Highway upgrades and new schools at Yarrabilba, and the things to give them faith that the Labor government was listening to them and they didn't have to protest through One Nation. Even to the point where, the One Nation candidate from 2017 is now the deputy mayor of Logan and has had to say nice things about Linus and his service to the community. So I think Linus has really sort of got stuck in there. I think on the maths of Logan, it is just like one of the most rapidly changing seats. Places that had farms 5 years ago now have thousands of houses. So, I think, Linus has put that effort into the field. Like the region of Logan's really interesting too, right? It's sort of, from outsiders, it's sort of seen as having like safe seats, but it's got all the seat of Springwood, which is like the classic bellwether seat. It's like never been held by an opposition since its creation in 1986. But I think, Mick de Brenny in Springwood has been, he's probably the only person I could think of who would sort of buck that trend. So, Logan is a chance to sort of remain 5 out of 5, because I think sort of the two places where there is some vulnerability, those two guys are, a campaign hardheads who are, actually doing the business on the ground.
Jackie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a little bit of colour and movement. The Jeremiah, the candidate running against Shannon, that's been a bit of colour and movement. But apart from that, Logan, like everywhere else, is just going to be an absolute grind. For Mick and for Linus and other Logan MPs, they can actually point to the things that have changed people's lives locally. The M1 upgrades, which we talked about before. I mean, that Springwood stretch has finally been complete, and I mean, I've driven on it, and it's incredible in terms of what that means for local residents. It's going to be quite profound. So, I mean, I think for locals, seeing that Labor governments matter when it comes to infrastructure delivery that changes people's lives. Labor governments matter when it comes to things like 50-cent fares, cost of living relief. They're the strong messages that need to be hammered on every single door and in every single call. And yeah, I think that our Logan candidates are absolutely doing that.
I do think we shouldn't miss though that the sort of the LNP's crime political manoeuvring is sort of also aimed at like those outer urban areas like Ipswich where they did the launch, and seats like Logan
and Redlands
Redlands, like that's it's a clear political strategy to target those electorates, and try and get people angry without actually getting people to vote for for an LNP agenda.
Let's get a sense of where the campaigns are starting to focus their energies in this last period of the campaign. Jackie, just starting with Christopher Foley. I mean, where's he been going in the last since we last spoke, actually?
Well, he's done a lot of work in the Redland area, from what I can see. I think that it's been interesting. I've seen that apart from Christopher Foley, there's been an intensity of effort in Townsville. And again, a lot of people are saying Townsville is going to be really, really hard for Labor. But what we're seeing is like Jared Blay has gone up there and really gotten stuck into the Katter One Nation candidate for Mundingburra, like in an incredible way, dragging up a non-custodial sentence against the Katter Party candidate for Mundingburra, and aligning him with the current mayor of Townsville, who was not clear about some stuff before he got elected. So they are really intensifying their efforts against Katter's party in Townsville. I mean, Evan suggested running those ads to have the deputy opposition leader up there just singularly hammering away at the Mundingburra Katter Australia Party candidate. Their internals must be saying that, Katter's party in Townsville has really got quite a bit of traction. So, yeah, I suspect there's a debate on tonight. It's the Sky debate, so I expect Chris Fully is absolutely going to be preparing for that, as Stephen would be. But in the 3 days up to polling day, I don't put it past either Stephen or Chris Fully to actually do one of those stunts that I think is quite effective, which is like 30 seats in 3 days, or we're going to touch on every single seat. Marginal seat in the next 24 hours or something like that. So I think we'll see a real ramping up of effort in the lead up to polling day.
What about Miles? Where's he been going since we last spoke?
Well, you've seen Stephen like across Cairns, Bundaberg, and those sort of regional centres. I think, as we sort of discussed in episode 1, I think like the Labor strategy has been very clear not to treat those regional cities as one big market, right? That you've got to, go to places where there are local issues and local candidates. And I think sort of doubling down on Tom Smith in Bundaberg has been like a clever strategy. I think trying to um, get into that Cairns market where there are 4 seats up for grabs, as being clever and sort of reflects that sort of Queensland Labor discipline of, taking each regional media market as its own separate campaign. We've also seen sort of investment back in Brisbane. Like we've seen Stephen last couple of days spend time in New Farm with Grace, in Barden with Jonty Bush, and also out at Redcliffe, which I think is sort of good to see the new candidate Cass sort of getting stuck in to replace Yvette Darth there.
Let's switch it up to campaign comms, and just because I'm conscious of the time as well, but I just wanted to get a sense from both of you about what we talked last week about some of the content that the Labor Party was putting out, really honing in on that issue around abortion and letting voters know that there are under no illusions that this guy is going to flip or he's full of shit when he gets into government. What are we seeing, Evan, from the LNP coming out of the campaign in this last week?
Yeah, so if you look through their ads over the last week, they've done lots of local little promises, which I think is probably smart from them to not make people think about the big choices for Chris Fully to go and promise football field upgrades and stuff, sort of build profile for the local candidates. Some they're still running the same shtick about adult crime, adult time. But as I keep saying, there's these bizarre ads in the Townsville market. Sort of having a competition with other parties to the right of them about who's on crime, and I suspect what's pretty clear from that, is that they are, to win those Townsville seats, they need to get people to do more than protest. The crime. The crime is about inspiring a protest against the Labor government, not about a plan for the future. So they're pretty clearly trying to convince people they shouldn't, vote one Katter and preference Labor back to send the message that they actually want to get them to vote one LNP. It's just, it is a good strategy for them though, right? Just to politicize crime for another couple of days, sort of their best hope of, getting a majority.
Is there anything changed from the Labor Party in terms of our online content since we last spoke, Jackie?
So I think that there's been a little bit more diversity in terms of Stephen's presence on social media. So he had a bowls and beers event in McConnell on the weekend, stacked with young people. He was at, I think it was the Redcliffe markets, and did some vox popping of electors. So Stephen is out there and he's actually talking to people in a very, I guess, courageous way, whereas you've got Chris Fully, who's playing a very sort of contained strategy, doesn't want to be anywhere where there's people freewheeling in terms of their opinions or women coming up to him and saying, "Are you going to take away my right to have an abortion if I don't want to carry a baby?" Like, so they're playing a very cautious campaign and not getting crucifully mingling with ordinary folk, whereas Stephen is out there, and I think some of that content has been really good. Its presence on social media has gained a lot of traction, and I think a lot of young people it's really appealing to young people. Talking about 50-cent fares, talking about some of the initiatives in terms of housing and aspirational ownership. So I think that's been tremendous. There was also a bit of a sorry, Evan. There was also a bit of a new take on the abortion issue, with a lot of young women speaking to camera about potential changes to recriminalise abortion would mean for them, and where they were parking their vote. So that was quite powerful as well.
And for the viewers out there, I mean, the three of us have got a group chat that we're back and forth and sharing stuff, and we sort of talked about that during the week, didn't we? We sort of said, this message needs to be carried by women, and then sure enough, by pure coincidence, obviously, not that anyone's eavesdropping on our group chat, that happened, right? And it's so good. It's reassuring to see that, and I think that's such an important message carrier.
I think, but coming back to Jackie's point, I think Stephen has done an incredible job of rebuilding Labor's brand amongst young people. There's lots of pundits out there who talk about young people departing for the Greens and other third parties, and I think Stephen, and particularly things that previous politicians weren't prepared to get on TikTok and have some fun and engage with people. Like, Stephen's done that. He's had some great social media content, and I
He
think
benched 100 kg.
There's a particular demographic who are loving that stuff, I bet. But I think but I reckon Stephen's done a really good job of pushing back on that staid and stuffy image that Labor politicians sometimes tempt. He has done a really good job of reaching out to young people, and I think you'll see that make a big difference. Being a bit braver, up for making fun of himself when other politicians weren't. I think it's a really good move, and I think it's been really clever, and frankly a bit brave, right, to push past some people who'll tut that he did some things online, some social media that people, would see as un-Premier like. But I think if you're talking to a new generation of voters, you got to talk about issues that they like 50-cent fares, but you also have got to actually show that you actually like talking to them and actually are prepared to spend time with them.
We had a listener send me a message during the week, and it said Queensland Labor are having an election campaign like the New York Mets postseason. Obviously, they know that I'm keen on any kind of sports metaphor, particularly US sports metaphor. I'll have to explain that to folks in a moment. But they've gone on to say unprecedented, unbelievable, and unheard of. No right being competitive, let alone narrowing it. But that's the thing I do love about this campaign, is that they are trying things as opposed to just saying, we're just going to use the strategy that helped us win last time and just roll that one out again. Campaigns have to be adapted to the environment that you're working in. And I think what they're doing is smart, and it's savvy. They're leaving no stone unturned. And it's authentic as well. It's like you can try and do new things, right? But if the tone is wrong, if Stephen comes off and it looks like it's forced, people sniff that a mile away, and the bullshit meter goes, and that's not you. But watching him in a lot of the online content, it looks that it's coming from a place where he cares, and it is authentic, and I think that will resonate well, particularly with with all voters, but in particular young voters. An older person trying to be hip and cool on social media can come off look like a dickhead, and he's not doing that. It's not laboured or forced, and I don't think that's going to prove.
Well, he's certainly carrying it off much better than Evan would have been able to.
Wow.
For your listeners, I just want to say, for your listeners, Stephen, we've had some complaints come in from comrades in Queensland who say that Evan and I are not authentically representing our relationship. We hang a lot more shit on each other. in normal life, and we should do so in this podcast. So that was my contribution, Evan.
Evan, would you like to retort?
Jackie's actually accusing me of awkward, which is probably like guilty as charged. But no, that is a fair allegation that we've been restrained.
But to your point, Stephen, I also think that because people have got such a low trust in politics and there's such a high degree of cynicism, the stuff around how do you authentically turn up and talk to people about what they're interested in, because politics does tend to cover off on a whole range of things, so public fares, cost of living, obviously. Stephen benching 100 kg, I wasn't just joking about that. Like, that is important. It's about health. It's about how you look after yourself, how you deal with stress. And for a lot of young men out there who are going to the gym and, want to bench weights, that's a hook into a conversation about the type of leader that Stephen is and what he believes in. So I think it's really clever, and it's actually going to people where they are and not expecting people to tune into you just because you're the premier.
Yeah.
And I think that's really clever.
Yep, great point. Okay, speaking of tuning in, let's talk about the media, and want to get a sense of who won the week and why. Jackie, can I go to you? And then we'll do our Tory with the Typewriter nomination for the week.
Sure. I mean, I thought the last week was tied, and I think it was tied because Crisafulli got a rude shock in the first 2 weeks. I think he thought he had Stephen's measure and he didn't. And he got, here's a sporting analogy for you, he got punched in the face and he didn't change his plan. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So for 2 weeks, he didn't change his plan. And then in the last debate, he sort of changed it a bit and tried to get on even footing. So I think that it meant that there was a tied week last week.
Evan, what do you think about that? You share Jackie's reflections?
No, I think that's a fair call. Like, I think Labor had that momentum in the first 2 weeks. And I think Labor lost some of that momentum in the couple of days after the launch, but they got it back by the end. Like, I don't think Labor's made a lot of progress during this campaign, but the sort of rate of progress that we had in the first 2 weeks probably didn't continue last week. I suspect they've had a better week this week, sort of with pretty disciplined messages from our team, and also more pressure from Crisafulli, as like the journos have really switched on to his, like, I know Sarah Elks has been doing those pieces about the $200,000 settlement that Crisafulli had for being a director of a company that was trading insolvent. I think there's a lot of focus going into those sorts of scrutiny. It might be a little bit too late, but like, I think some of that scrutiny that's coming is sort of doing some damage to Crisafulli's credibility.
All right, here comes the fun bit. Jackie, who's your Tory with a Typewriter nomination for the third week?
So I am going to circle back to my first nomination, and that's Hayden Johnson.
2 votes.
Yeah, he gets 2 votes from me. And the reason for that is after or during the last leaders debate, and subsequently, he has been running on this campaign that both leaders are running scare campaigns. And when are they going to put down their scare campaigns and run a real information heavy campaign? And this coming from a News Limited journalist, and we all know that News Limited has got a significant track record when it comes to scare campaigns, whether that's on The Voice or Action on Climate Change or
African gangs.
African gangs, Anyway, so I just thought that was incredible. It certainly shows a certain degree of limited self-awareness.
And even if we gave you the information you're after, Hayden, you're not going to run it anyway. So what's the point? Like, anyway.
Well, you curate it in a way that produces a sensationalist story or a sensationalist headline, and put any facts right at the end where people don't actually get to.
Very good. Well, congratulations, Hayden. I think you're on the top of the leaderboard now. Evan, who's your Tory of the Typewriter nomination for this week?
Well, I'm going to buck the trend again, Stephen, and I've got a different award this week. It is the Drinking the Kool-Aid Award from someone who generally does a pretty good job. But Ben Smee at The Guardian wrote an incredible article this week about the Green insurgency into Logan, how, the Greens were going to connect with working class people and they were going to invest in Logan like never before. Fundamentally, it actually just doesn't match with what the Greens do. We know that the Greens have taken all of their resources out of those outer urban seats and piled them into a small number of inner city seats. Like, that's been their strategy for a decade. And I think, in an election where minor parties like One Nation and Katter are getting as much, if not more, votes than the Greens, there's clearly a pitch from the Greens that they are running an insurgent campaign in working class suburbs. Doesn't add up mathematically, but also misses the bigger third party debate that there is these right-wing parties who are exploiting fear and grievance. We know those third parties, whether they're left or right, all have the same tactics, but to miss the bigger point of sort of the One Nation mix is a pretty big call, I gotta say.
Well, congratulations, Ben, the inaugural winner of the Drinking the Kool-Aid Award. Very good. Okay, that's our hour. And this is our last episode before the election. Obviously, we'll be back to do a recap next week. So there you go. Before I just get some final reflections from our two guests today, just a reminder, obviously this episode's gone up earlier this week. Friday, we're still dropping our second US presidential recap with Katie Parsons and Ross Morales-Ricetto, so look out for that as well. And obviously we'll do a Queensland election recap, which will go out sometime next week, because we've also got a US election episode next week as well. Anyway, I'll leave it up to Rebecca to decide. But so look out for that. Jackie, where are you spending election day? What's your plans? Do you have a routine, superstitions, traditions?
Yes, I have a routine, but obviously it's going to be a bit different because I'm not a candidate this time. But normally I get up quite early and walk around and have a look at, literally walk a lot of the nervous energy out of me, walking about 10 kilometres, having a look at the booths. This election is going to be really interesting because all of the really tight signage restrictions come into play. So it'll be really interesting to see how the booths look on election day. So I definitely will be spending some time locally in South Brisbane, helping out Barbara O'Shea, and also in another seat, I'll probably go over and help in McConnell if I can.
Fantastic. Evan, you're in London.
But I will be back. I would not miss I'd not miss my shift on the Junction Park State School polling booth or anything, Stephen. I'm flying back just for that.
Yeah,
I'll be at the I'll be down to the Junction Park State School polling booth all morning. The PNC there are selling some 50-cent fairy cakes and some classic election day gifts. It'll be good fun.
Excellent. Well, there is still days left of voting as you're listening to this episode. And if you haven't volunteered your time on the Labor campaign, just in the show notes, click on that link and register your details. And a field organiser will give you a call to knock on doors or make calls in the final 48 or wherever many hours are left while you're listening to this show. And obviously on election days, while we desperately need folks to hand out at a polling centre across this incredibly large state of Queensland. So no matter where you are, please register your details and someone will get in touch with you and put you on a booth as well. Jackie Trad, Evan Moorhead, thank you so much for your contribution to our third episode. Good luck on the weekend, and I look forward to talking to you both next week for our election recap.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.